What's hiding in that black girl hair? Drugs or lice? Yeah, probably
Officer
both.
Craig Dawson said it loud enough for the whole booking room to hear. 3 cops behind him. Not one flinched. The woman looked up at him.
Don't touch my hair.
He slammed her face into the steel table.
Shut your mouth! Animals don't get to make demands.
Get your hands off me. You don't know who you're...
The clippers drowned out the rest. 6 years of growth fell to concrete. She fought. 2 officers pinned her down. Then she stopped struggling. Not because she gave up, because she started memorizing. Every face, every badge number. Weeks later, this same woman stepped up to the judge's bench, and the moment she did, Craig Dawson realized that shaving her head was the worst damn mistake of his entire life. The federal courthouse in Richmond, Virginia, sat heavy under a gray October sky. Inside courtroom 4B, the air smelled like old wood and floor polish. An American flag stood stiff in the corner. The overhead lights buzzed the way they always do in government buildings, just loud enough to remind you where you are. Officer Craig Dawson walked in like he owned the place. Full dress uniform, shoes polished to a mirror shine, badge centered on his chest, catching the light every time he moved. He pulled out his chair at the defense table, unbuttoned his jacket, and sat down with his legs crossed. Relaxed, comfortable, like a man sitting in his own living room. His attorney, Gerald Loomis, sat beside him. Dark suit, leather portfolio, silver pen. Loomis had the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases he probably shouldn't have won. He arranged his papers without looking up, like this trial was just another Tuesday. On the other side of the courtroom, the plaintiff's table was quiet. An older black man in a simple gray suit sat with his hands folded. Reginald Owens, the attorney representing the woman who filed this lawsuit. Next to him sat a woman in a navy dress and a silk head wrap. No jewelry except small gold earrings. She didn't move. She didn't whisper to her lawyer. She just sat there, still, watching everything. If you looked at both tables, you'd think you already knew who was going to win. One side looked like power. The other side looked like patience. Judge Eleanor Whitfield entered. 62 years old, silver hair pulled back tight, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had a reputation in the federal district, sharp, fair, and absolutely allergic to nonsense. She sat, opened her file, and said, "This is Hammond versus Dawson and Granton County. We'll begin with the defense. Counselor Loomis, call your first witness." Loomis stood slowly, buttoned his jacket. "The defense calls Officer Craig Dawson." Dawson rose, walked to the witness stand, and raised his right hand like he'd done it 100 times. He probably had. 14 years on the force gives a man plenty of practice swearing to tell the truth. Loomis started easy. Background first. "Officer Dawson, how long have you served with the Granton County Police Department?" 14 years this past March. "And in that time, have you received any commendations?" Dawson nodded. "Several. Community Policing Award in 2019, Officer of the Quarter twice, letters of appreciation from local businesses." Loomis introduced the file, a thick folder of commendations, training certificates, performance reviews. He handed copies to the judge and let the papers do their work. On the surface, Craig Dawson looked like exactly the kind of officer you'd want patrolling your neighborhood. Then, Loomis moved to the night in question. "Officer Dawson, walk us through what happened on the evening of June 14th. Dawson leaned back slightly, like he was recalling something routine. "I was on patrol along Route 9, just outside town. I observed a vehicle with a malfunctioning taillight, the left rear. I initiated a standard traffic stop." "And what happened when you approached the vehicle?" "The driver was uncooperative from the start. I asked for license and registration. She was slow to respond, kept reaching for her bag in the passenger seat without telling me what she was doing. That's a safety concern. What did you do? I asked her to step out of the vehicle, standard procedure when a subject's behavior raises concern. She refused initially. I had to ask 3 times. At that point, I made the decision to detain her for further investigation. Not once, not a single time, did Dawson use her name. She was the driver, the subject, the female. Like he was describing an object in a report, not a person he had physically restrained. Loomis continued. And what happened at the booking facility? Here Dawson sat up straighter, choosing his words carefully. During the intake process, department protocol requires a thorough search for concealed items. The subject she had very voluminous natural hair. Thick, dense. In my experience, that type of hair can conceal small items. Razor blades, narcotics, things of that nature. He said, that type of hair, and didn't blink. I requested that she allow a manual search of her hair. She refused, became agitated. At that point, I determined that a closer inspection was necessary for officer safety, and I used department-issued grooming tools to remove the hair so a proper search could be conducted. Department-issued grooming tools. That's what he called the clippers. Like he was filling out a form, instead of describing the moment he held a woman down and shaved her head. Loomis asked, "And did you find any concealed items?" No, but the absence of contraband doesn't mean the search wasn't justified. You don't know what's hidden until you look. He said that with a straight face. No pause, no hesitation. Like it was the most reasonable sentence in the world. Loomis shifted to the question of supervision. Was your supervising officer aware of the procedure? Sergeant Teller was informed and approved the search protocol. That sentence would matter later. Remember it. Loomis then spent several minutes building a wall around Dawson. More commendations, training records, a statement from a local pastor praising his community involvement. Brick by brick, he was constructing the image of a dedicated public servant caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding. Finally, Dawson delivered his closing line from the stand. He looked at the jury, made eye contact with as many of them as he could, and said, "I treated her the same as I'd treat anyone. This isn't about race. It's about safety. I did my job." The courtroom was quiet for a moment. At the plaintiff's table, Reginald Owens hadn't objected once during the entire testimony. Not once. He didn't take notes. He didn't whisper to his client. He just sat there, with one hand resting on a thick folder in front of him, like a man who already knew every card in the deck and was waiting for the right moment to flip the table. Riel Hammond sat beside him, face completely still. If Dawson's testimony made her angry, she didn't show it. If his lies made her want to stand up and scream, she swallowed it whole. She just watched him, the same way she had watched him in that booking room. Quiet, focused, recording everything behind those dark, steady eyes. And here's what nobody in that courtroom understood yet. Not the judge, not the jury, not Gerald Loomis, and certainly not Craig Dawson. The silence at that plaintiff's table wasn't weakness. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't a woman too overwhelmed to respond. It was a trap. And Dawson had just walked straight into it. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Same fluorescent lights, same stiff flag in the corner, but the energy had shifted. Maybe it was the jury. A few of them had barely slept, still hearing Dawson's voice saying, "that type of hair," on a loop in their heads. Maybe it was the gallery. Fuller now, words spreading the way it does when a case starts to feel like something bigger than a lawsuit. Or maybe it was her. Riel Hammond walked into the courtroom in the same navy dress, same silk head wrap, same small gold earrings. No makeup trying to hide anything. If you looked closely, and the jury did, you could still see faint razor nicks near her temples, thin lines where the clippers had caught skin. She didn't cover them. She didn't look away when people stared. She sat down next to Reginald Owens, placed her hands flat on the table, and waited. Owens stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Brielle Hammond." She rose, walked to the witness stand, and took the oath. Her voice was low and clear, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. Every word landed exactly where she put it. Owens began. "Ms. Hammond, take us back to the evening of June 14th. Where were you coming from?" "I was driving home from a work trip, returning on Route 9 into Granton." "Were you speeding? Running a light? Anything unusual about your driving?" "No, I was doing the speed limit. Both hands on the wheel." "And what happened?" "I saw flashing lights behind me. I pulled over immediately. I turned off the engine, put my hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen, and waited." She described it the way someone describes a fire drill: practiced, methodical, precise. This was not a woman who panicked during a traffic stop. This was a woman who had a routine for it. Officer Dawson approached the driver's side. I rolled down the window. He asked for license and registration. I told him I was reaching into the glove compartment, and I did so slowly. "Did he tell you why he pulled you over?" "He said my left taillight was broken." "Was it?" "No. I had my car serviced 2 days before, full inspection. All lights were functional. I have the receipt and the mechanic's report." Owens made a small note but didn't press further. Not yet. He was saving that. What happened next? Brielle's voice stayed level, but something behind her eyes shifted, like a door opening to a room she'd kept locked. "He told me to step out of the vehicle. I asked if I was being detained. He said, 'You are now.' 2 more officers arrived. I was handcuffed and placed in the back of a cruiser. He never told me what I was being charged with, because there was nothing to charge me with." "Where were you taken?" "Granton County Booking Facility. They brought me to a room in the back, room B4. "Describe that room." She paused, not for drama, to be accurate. "Small, concrete walls, a steel table bolted to the floor, 1 chair, fluorescent light overhead, and a camera bracket on the wall. Empty. No camera, just a bracket with loose wires hanging from it." She said that detail, the empty bracket, the loose wires, like a scientist recording an observation. No emotion attached, just fact. But the jury heard it. You could see it register on their faces. "What happened in that room?" "Officer Dawson entered wearing latex gloves. He told me my hair presented a concealment risk and that he needed to search it. I told him I would consent to a search by a female officer. He refused." "What were his exact words?" "He said, 'You don't get to make demands.' Then he said, 'We can do this easy or hard.'" "What did you do?" "I asked again for a female officer. I stated clearly that I did not consent to a male officer touching my hair or my body." "And then?" She didn't look away from the jury, not for a second. "He pushed my head down onto the table. I felt the clippers at the top of my skull. The vibration went through my teeth into my jaw. He started at the crown and moved forward." The courtroom was dead silent. One juror, a woman in her 50s, pressed her fingers against her lips. "I could hear my hair hitting the floor. Not falling, hitting. Heavy pieces, 6 years of growth. It made a sound. I didn't know hair could make a sound like that." She stopped, took 1 breath, continued. "No one in that room spoke. No one told him to stop. The young deputy near the door, she turned away. But she didn't leave. And she didn't say a word." Owens let the silence hold for a long moment before he continued. "Ms. Hammond, after the search, was anything found?" "Nothing. No contraband, no weapons. Nothing." "Were you charged with any crime?" No. What were you given when you were released? A clear plastic bag with my personal belongings. And my hair. They put my hair in the bag. Something cracked in the room when she said that. Not a sound. A feeling. Like the air pressure changed. Two jurors looked down at their hands. A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. Owens then placed a photograph on the evidence table. It showed Brielle standing in front of a large stone building on a bright morning, smiling, relaxed, her natural hair full and radiant. It was taken the morning before the arrest. Ms. Hammond, is this you? Yes, that was taken the day before. And this is you now? She touched the edge of her head wrap. This is me now. The contrast didn't need words. The jury could see. Then came the moment that changed the temperature of the entire trial. Owens asked a simple question. Ms. Hammond, during the incident, you remained remarkably composed. Can you tell the court why? She looked directly at the jury. I did not resist because I have been trained for situations exactly like this. Trained. That single word sat in the middle of the courtroom like a grenade with the pin pulled. Gerald Loomis grabbed his pen and scribbled something fast. Dawson tilted his head slightly, confused. Judge Whitfield's eyebrow lifted just a fraction. No one asked the follow-up question. Not yet. What kind of training? Trained by whom? For what purpose? Brielle didn't offer more. She simply folded her hands and waited. The same way she'd been waiting since the night Craig Dawson turned on those clippers. And at the plaintiff's table, Reginald Owens rested his hand on that thick folder again. Still closed. Still waiting. The jury didn't know it yet. The judge didn't know it yet. And Craig Dawson, sitting at the defense table with his polished badge and pressed uniform, certainly didn't know it. But the first crack had just appeared in the wall, and what was behind it would bring the whole thing down. That evening, the narrator pulls us out of the courtroom and into a different world. Brielle Hammond's apartment sat on the third floor of a quiet brick building in Arlington, Virginia. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed success. A clean kitchen with a French press on the counter. A bookshelf organized not by color or size, but by subject. Constitutional law, civil procedure, federal sentencing guidelines. And one shelf near the bottom dedicated to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. On the wall behind a tall fiddle-leaf fig plant, partially hidden by the leaves, hung a framed diploma. Columbia Law School. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it entirely. That was the point. Brielle Hammond didn't decorate her life with credentials. She never needed a wall to tell people who she was. But tonight, the kitchen table told a different story. A thick manila folder lay open under the warm light. Inside, printed emails, FOIA response letters stamped with federal seals, body cam footage request forms, personnel files with sections highlighted in yellow, and a timeline handwritten on legal paper. Every document had a small tab on the edge, color-coded, labeled in her handwriting. This wasn't a collection. It was a weapon. And it had been built in silence. The week after the arrest, Brielle didn't do what most people would have done. She didn't post on social media. She didn't call a reporter. She didn't go on camera with tears in her eyes, begging the public for sympathy. She picked up the phone and called one person, Reginald Owens, 71 years old, semi-retired civil rights attorney, a man who had marched in Selma as a teenager and spent the next 5 decades turning outrage into case law. He and Brielle had known each other for over a decade. He'd mentored her during law school, watched her rise, and understood exactly how she thought. She told him what happened, every detail. And then she said the sentence that set the entire strategy in motion. Reg, I need you to file the lawsuit. Your name on everything. Not mine. Not yet. Owens didn't ask why. He already knew. He filed the civil lawsuit in federal court. Owens as attorney of record, Brielle listed only as the plaintiff. Nowhere in the filing did it mention her occupation. No title, no employer, nothing. As far as the Granton County legal team was concerned, this was a straightforward civil rights complaint filed by an ordinary citizen with a semi-retired lawyer. They had no idea what they were walking into. Because here's who Brielle Hammond actually was. Senior Investigative Attorney, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. She had spent the last 6 years leading federal pattern or practice investigations, the kind that result in consent decrees, department overhauls, and officers losing their badges permanently. She had personally led investigations into 4 police departments. 4. One of them was just 40 miles from Granton. She knew how departments buried complaints. She knew which records to FOIA, which metadata to request, which backup servers stored body cam footage that local IT departments swore had been deleted. She knew which supervisors would lie under oath and exactly how to catch them doing it. And she had been building this case the way she built every federal case, quietly, methodically, with the kind of documentation that doesn't leave room for doubt. She closed the folder. On the front tab, written in neat black ink, were 2 words and 1 initial. Dawson, C. Pattern file. Pattern. Not incident, not complaint. Pattern. That word would come back to haunt Craig Dawson in ways he couldn't imagine. Brielle stood and walked to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. The short, uneven stubble growing back in patches where the clippers had been careless. She ran her hand over it slowly. Her expression wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something harder, something quieter. Resolve. She whispered 2 words to her own reflection. Every single one of them. Then she turned off the light and went back to the kitchen table. She had work to do, and Craig Dawson, out there somewhere tonight, sleeping soundly, badge on his nightstand, absolutely certain this lawsuit was going nowhere, had no idea that the woman he had called an animal was about to dismantle his entire career with a manila folder and a federal seal. Day 2. Afternoon session. The courtroom was fuller than the morning. Reporters filled the back rows. A few local activists sat near the door. The jury, 12 people who had spent the morning listening to Brielle describe the sound of her own hair hitting concrete, sat with a tension in their shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. Judge Whitfield called the session to order. Mr. Owens, you may continue. Reginald Owens stood slowly. He buttoned one button on his gray suit jacket and carried a single folder to the center of the courtroom. Not the thick one, a thinner one, the kind that holds just enough to change the direction of a trial. Your Honor, the plaintiff wishes to introduce 4 pieces of independent evidence. Loomis shifted in his seat. Dawson didn't move, still had his legs crossed, still had that look. The one that said this was a waste of his time. That look was about to disappear. Exhibit A, maintenance log from the Granton County booking facility. Owens placed the document on the evidence table, handed copies to the judge and jury, and explained it plain. Room B4 was equipped with a ceiling-mounted security camera. According to the log, that camera was removed for repair at 3:15 on the afternoon of June 14th. Brielle was brought into that room at 8:40 that evening. The camera was reinstalled the following morning at 7 a.m. The maintenance request was signed by one person. He looked at Dawson. Officer Craig Dawson. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Loomis stood. Objection. The timing is coincidental. Officers regularly submit maintenance requests. Whitfield looked at him over her glasses. Overruled. Continue. Exhibit B. Dashcam footage from the plaintiff's vehicle. A screen was set up facing the jury. The footage played. Clear, steady, time-stamped. Brielle's car on Route 9, June 14th. A gas station sign visible on the right. Morrison's fuel stop, Granton. And both taillights glowing bright red. fully functional. Owens paused the footage. Officer Dawson testified he pulled Ms. Hammond over for a broken left taillight. This footage, with GPS coordinates and timestamp in the metadata, shows both lights working at the exact time and location of the stop. The stated reason for the traffic stop was false. Loomis tried. The dash cam could be from a different date. Owens placed the metadata analysis on the table. Certified forensic lab, GPS match, timestamp match. The gas station confirmed at that location. Counselor Loomis is welcome to hire his own expert to dispute it. Loomis sat down. He didn't dispute it. Dawson uncrossed his legs, first time in 2 days. Exhibit C, Officer Dawson's body cam footage. The room tightened. Owens addressed the court. The department responded to our discovery request by stating that Officer Dawson's body cam malfunctioned on June 14th and no footage was available. He paused. That statement was not accurate. A federal records request, filed through specific channels, had recovered the footage from a cloud backup server. The footage had always existed. It had simply never been pulled. The screen lit up. Shaky at first, Dawson walking through the booking hallway, then room B4. The empty camera bracket on the wall. Brielle in the chair, hands cuffed. Dawson's voice came through the speaker. He was laughing, not nervous, casual. He snapped on latex gloves. The sound echoed off concrete walls. Brielle's voice, calm. I want a female officer present. He didn't look at her. He picked up the clippers, then the line that split the courtroom open. As the clippers touched her scalp, Dawson turned to the officer behind him and said, "That she wishes she'd just straightened it, huh?" Sharp inhales across the room. A juror covered her mouth. Another removed her glasses and pressed her hand to her forehead. A young male juror closed his eyes and shook his head. Whitfield struck her gavel once. Order held. But that sentence, casual, smiling, spoken while shaving a restrained woman's head, had burned itself into every person in that room. Owens stopped the footage. Exhibit D, 3 additional complaints. 3 files on the evidence table. 3 black women. 4 years. All described forced or coerced hair searches during booking. All had natural hairstyles. All complaints investigated internally. All classified as unfounded. He opened one. Filed in 2022. The account mirrors Ms. Hammond's word for word. Same room, B4. Same language, concealment risk. Same clippers without consent. And the same detail. He looked up. Camera removed from maintenance on the day of her booking. He closed the file. Your Honor, how many coincidences does it take before we call it a pattern? The question hung in the air like smoke. At the defense table, Dawson's posture had collapsed. Legs uncrossed, shoulders forward, jaw locked. Loomis whispered something urgent. Dawson didn't respond. He stared at the 3 files like they were loaded guns. And still, Owens had not revealed the most important thing. The thick folder on the plaintiff's table was still closed. Owens walked back, sat down, and rested his hand on it. Patient. Brielle sat beside him, still as stone. But if you watched her hands, just for a second, you'd see her fingers press gently against the table. Not nervousness. Readiness. The way a runner presses into the blocks before the gun fires. 4 rungs on the evidence ladder now. False traffic stop, disabled camera, recovered body cam with a racist slur. A 4-year pattern of identical abuse. The 5th rung, the one that would shatter everything, was still waiting. Day 3. The courtroom was standing room only. Every seat in the gallery taken. Reporters lined the back wall with notebooks open. 2 sketch artists sat in the front row, pencils already moving. Word had spread overnight. The body cam footage, the pattern of complaints, the camera conveniently removed before every incident. Social media hadn't seen the footage yet, but people could feel it. Something was about to break. Judge Whitfield entered, sat, and opened the session without small talk. "Mr. Owens, does the plaintiff have additional evidence to present?" Owens stood, but this time something was different. He didn't carry a folder. He didn't approach the evidence table. He simply said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests permission to make an additional disclosure relevant to the scope of this case." Whitfield studied him for a moment. "Proceed." Owens turned to Brielle. A small nod, that was all. Brielle Hammond stood up from the plaintiff's table. The room watched her the way a room watches someone about to jump, not knowing if they'll fall or fly. She reached up with both hands and removed the silk head wrap. Slowly, deliberately, folding it once and placing it on the table beside her. Her head was exposed. Short, uneven stubble, some patches thinner than others where the clippers had been rough, where they'd nicked the skin. Under the hard courtroom light, every mark was visible. Every scar from that night was on display. She wanted them to see. All of them. The jury, the judge, the gallery, the reporters, and Craig Dawson. Especially Craig Dawson. The courtroom went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight. A female juror brought her hand to her chest. A man in the gallery lowered his head. Then Brielle picked up a leather portfolio from the table. She didn't walk to the witness stand. She didn't return to her seat. She walked directly toward the judge's bench. Loomis shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely irregular. The plaintiff cannot simply approach the bench without—" Whitfield raised one hand. Loomis stopped mid-sentence. The judge's eyes never left Brielle. Brielle placed 3 items on the bench in front of Judge Whitfield. The first, a laminated photo ID badge, blue and gold, the seal of the United States Department of Justice. The second, a federal bar certification, current and valid. The third, a letter on official DOJ letterhead, signed by the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, confirming that Brielle Hammond had led or contributed to 4 federal pattern or practice investigations into police departments in the past 6 years. One of those departments was located 40 miles from Granton. Whitfield picked up the ID badge, studied it, looked at the photo, looked at Brielle, looked at the letter, read it twice. Then Brielle turned to face the courtroom. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name is Brielle Hammond. I'm a senior investigative attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. I have spent my career holding law enforcement accountable for exactly the kind of conduct documented in this courtroom." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, one by one, rippling outward until they touched every wall. At the defense table, Craig Dawson's face emptied. Not anger, not confusion, just gone. The color drained from his skin, like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. He turned to Loomis. Loomis was staring at the DOJ badge on the judge's bench. His silver pen had stopped moving. Neither of them spoke. In the gallery, Sergeant Vince Teller, who had come to support his officer, dropped his head into both hands. Judge Whitfield set down the letter and looked over her glasses at the defense table. "Let the record reflect the plaintiff's credentials and professional standing." She paused, then turned to Loomis. "Counselor, does the defense wish to request a recess?" Loomis stammered. "Your Honor, Yes, we'd like to request—" Whitfield cut him off. "You've had 14 years of recesses, Counselor. We're moving forward." Brielle was still standing, still facing the room. Her eyes moved across the jury, past the gallery, and came to rest on Craig Dawson. The same eyes that had stared at the ceiling of room B4 while he shaved her head. The same eyes that had memorized his badge number while he laughed. The same eyes that had watched him testify yesterday with that smug, bored expression, calling her the female and the subject. Now those eyes held something different. Not revenge, not hatred. Authority. She had let him talk, let him lie, let him build his little wall of commendations and excuses brick by brick until he felt safe behind it. And now she was the one holding the sledgehammer. Reginald Owens stood and buttoned his jacket. No rush, no dramatic opening. He walked to the center of the courtroom the way a surgeon walks into an operating room. Calm hands, sharp mind, every cut already planned. The plaintiff calls Officer Craig Dawson back to the stand. Loomis leaned toward Dawson and whispered something. Dawson shook his head slightly, stood, and walked to the witness stand. His steps were slower now. The swagger from day one was gone. He sat, adjusted his collar, and gripped the armrest with his right hand. Owens didn't start with the big questions. He started with a small one. Officer Dawson, you testified that removing the security camera from room B4 was a routine maintenance request. Is that correct? Yes. How many maintenance requests have you personally signed during your 14 years with the department? Dawson paused. I don't have the exact number. Owens placed a document on the evidence table. I do. Your department's records show that in 14 years of service, you have signed exactly one maintenance request. One. He looked up. This one. The camera in room B4, 3 hours before Ms. Hammond arrived. Dawson said nothing. Officer Dawson, would you call that routine? Things come up. It needed repair. It needed repair 3 hours before you shaved a woman's head in that exact room, and it was reinstalled the next morning, fully functional. Owens let that sit. Interesting timing for a repair. Loomis half rose. Your Honor, I'll move on, Owens said, already turning the page. Officer Dawson, you used the phrase concealment risk to justify searching Ms. Hammond's hair. Is there a written department policy that authorizes forcible hair removal during booking? It falls under officer discretion. That's not what I asked. Is there a written policy? Silence. Owens produced a thick booklet, the Granton County Police Department Policy Manual. He held it up so the jury could see it. I've read this cover to cover, every page. There is no policy, not one sentence, that authorizes an officer to forcibly cut or shave a detainee's hair. The words concealment risk in reference to hair do not appear anywhere in this manual. He set the manual down. Your officer discretion have no policy basis, no written authority, no departmental guideline. You made it up. Dawson's jaw tightened. I used my judgment. You used your judgment. Owens repeated it slowly, letting the jury hear how hollow it sounded. Then he moved to the third line. Let's talk about judgment then. I'd like to read from 3 complaints filed against you between 2020 and 2023. He picked up the first file. Complaint 1. A black woman detained during a traffic stop, booking facility, room B4. Hair described as natural voluminous. Searched using clippers without consent. Camera in the room. Removed for maintenance the same day. Second file. Complaint 2. A black woman detained during a DUI checkpoint, room B4. Hair described as thick natural. Clippers used. Camera removed. Third file. Complaint 3, 2022. A black woman detained for a warrant that turned out to be a clerical error. Room B4. Same language. Concealment risk. Same clippers. Same missing camera. He set all 3 files down in a row in front of the jury box. 3 women, 4 years, same room, same procedure, same words coming out of your mouth, same camera disappearing the same day. He turned to Dawson. Officer Dawson, did you rehearse these encounters?
Loomis shot up. Objection! Inflammatory!
Whitfield barely glanced at him. Overruled. Dawson didn't answer. Owens didn't push. The question was already doing its work inside the heads of 12 jurors. Then Owens said, "The plaintiff calls Deputy Corinne Sadler." A ripple went through the gallery. At the defense table, Dawson's head turned sharply toward the door. Sadler entered from a side hallway. Late 20s, blonde hair pulled back. She was wearing civilian clothes, no uniform. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and even from a distance you could see them shaking. She took the oath, sat down, and looked at no one except Owens. "Deputy Sadler, were you present in room B4 on the night of June 14th? "Yes." "Did you witness Officer Dawson shave Ms. Hammond's head?" "Yes." "Did Ms. Hammond request a female officer?"
Yes, she asked twice.
"Was that request honored?" "No." Owens paused. Then, gently, like a man handling something fragile, he asked, "Deputy Sadler, after the incident, did Officer Dawson say anything to you about your report?" Her chin trembled. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "He told me, don't put that in your report." The courtroom exhaled. A juror shook his head. A woman in the gallery whispered something to the person beside her.
Owens asked, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?"
Sadler's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. He's been on the force 14 years. I've been there, too. I saw what happened to those other women's complaints. They all disappeared. I thought mine would, too. I thought I would, too." Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them. And that's when Dawson broke. He stood up at the defense table and pointed directly at Sadler. "She's lying. She was fine with it. She didn't say a damn thing that night, not one word, and now she wants to play hero?" Whitfield's gavel came down hard. "Officer Dawson, sit down. Now." Loomis grabbed Dawson's arm. Dawson shook it off. "This is a setup. All of this. It's a—" "One more word," Whitfield said, her voice quiet and lethal. "And I will hold you in contempt. Sit down." Dawson sat, but the mask was gone. The composed, decorated officer from day one, the man who crossed his legs and smiled and called a woman the female without blinking, was gone. What was left was a man who had just realized, in front of a packed courtroom, that every door was locked and every window was shut. And in the gallery, something small but important happened. 3 officers in civilian clothes, Dawson's colleagues who had come to support him, quietly looked at the floor. One of them stood up and walked out. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed. Closing arguments came the same afternoon. Judge Whitfield saw no reason to delay. Neither did anyone else. The courtroom had reached the kind of pressure that doesn't benefit from overnight rest. It needed a verdict the way a storm needs to break. Loomis went first. He stood slowly, adjusted his tie, and faced the jury with the expression of a man assembling furniture with missing parts. He knew what he had. He also knew what he didn't. "Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Dawson has served this community for 14 years. He has put on that badge every single morning and walked into situations most of us will never face. Was the encounter with Ms. Hammond ideal? No. Were mistakes made? Perhaps. But mistakes are not crimes. Judgment calls made under pressure, in a booking facility, late at night, with an uncooperative detainee. Those calls deserve context, not condemnation." He talked about the difficulty of police work, He talked about split-second decisions. He referenced Dawson's commendations one more time, like a man playing the last card in a losing hand. The complaints introduced today are unrelated incidents, viewed through a lens of bias. The camera removal was maintenance, the hair search was a judgment call, and the plaintiff, with all due respect to her impressive credentials, is not immune to exaggeration. He sat down. The jury gave him nothing. No nods, no eye contact. 12 faces made of stone. Then Reginald Owens rose. He didn't button his jacket this time. He didn't carry a folder. He walked to the center of the courtroom with nothing in his hands and stood there for a long moment, looking at the jury the way a teacher looks at a classroom before saying something they need to remember for the rest of their lives. When he spoke, his voice was low. Not soft. Low. The kind of low that makes you lean forward. I'm not going to talk to you about Officer Dawson's commendations. I'm not going to talk about how hard police work is. That's not what this case is about. He took one step closer to the jury box. This case is about a room. Room B4. A room with no camera, because the man who used that room made sure there was no camera. A room where a woman was held down by 2 officers while a third man shaved her head. Not because she was hiding anything, not because policy required it, because he wanted to, because he could, and because he had done it before, to 3 other women in that same room, using those same clippers, with that same camera conveniently missing. He paused. Counselor Loomis called it a judgment call. I'd like to offer a different word. He looked at the jury. Ritual. The word dropped like a hammer on glass. This was not a search. This was a ritual of humiliation performed by a man who believed, correctly until today, that no one would ever hold him accountable for it. He targeted black women. He targeted their hair, something personal, something cultural, something that takes years to grow and seconds to destroy. And every time he did it, he removed the camera first. Every single time. He let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Ms. Hammond is a senior investigative attorney with the United States Department of Justice. She has spent her career doing exactly what she is doing in this courtroom today, holding power accountable. But I want to be very clear about something. He looked each juror in the eye, one by one. She should not have needed those credentials to receive justice. The 3 women before her, the ones whose complaints were marked unfounded and filed away, they didn't have a DOJ badge. They didn't have a federal bar card. They were ordinary women who were violated by a man with a badge, and the system told them it didn't happen. His voice dropped even lower. Today you have a chance to tell them it did. He walked back to the plaintiff's table and sat down. No dramatic turn, no final flourish. Just a man who had said what needed to be said and trusted 12 people to do the right thing. Judge Whitfield dismissed the jury for deliberation. They were back in 96 minutes. The foreperson, a retired school teacher with silver-rimmed glasses, stood and read the verdict. Liable. On every count. The jury found Officer Craig Dawson personally liable for assault, violation of civil rights under federal law, and destruction of evidence. They found the Granton County Police Department liable for failure to supervise, failure to investigate prior complaints, and deliberate indifference to a pattern of abuse. Whitfield accepted the verdict and then addressed the courtroom directly. This court awards compensatory and punitive damages to the plaintiff, Brielle Hammond, in an amount to be determined in a separate proceeding. The court additionally awards damages to the 3 prior complainants whose cases were improperly dismissed. She removed her glasses. Furthermore, this court is referring the full evidentiary record to the United States Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution of Officer Dawson, including charges of assault, civil rights violations, and evidence tampering. I am also recommending immediate decertification, the permanent revocation of Officer Dawson's ability to serve in any law enforcement capacity in any jurisdiction. She looked at Dawson. And I am ordering an independent audit of every complaint classified as unfounded by the Granson County Police Department in the past 10 years. Dawson sat motionless. His badge, the one he had polished that morning, the one that caught the light on day one when he walked in like he owned the place, sat on his chest reflecting the fluorescent light. He looked down at it. He didn't touch it. Brielle closed her portfolio. She stood. She looked at Judge Whitfield and gave one small nod, one professional acknowledging another. Then she turned and walked toward the courtroom doors. She passed Craig Dawson's table without looking at him. She didn't slow down. She didn't speed up. She just walked, steady and straight, the way she had walked into this courtroom on day one. Except now the head wrap was off, and every mark on her scalp was visible under the light. Outside the courtroom doors, the hallway was nearly empty, but not completely. 3 women stood near the far wall, different ages, different clothes, but they had one thing in common. They had all been in room B4. They had all filed complaints. They had all been told it didn't happen. One of them, the woman from 2022, saw Brielle come through the doors. Their eyes met across the hallway. No words, no dramatic embrace, just recognition. The kind that only exists between people who have survived the same thing. Brielle walked to her, took her hand, held it for a long moment. Then she kept walking. She didn't need to say anything. The verdict had said it all. In the weeks that followed, the consequences came one after another, like dominoes falling in a line that Craig Dawson had built with his own hands. He was terminated from the Granson County Police Department within 72 hours of the verdict. His badge, the one he had polished every morning for 14 years, was collected at his desk by an internal affairs officer who didn't shake his hand. His locker was emptied. His name was removed from the Community Policing Award plaque in the station lobby. By the end of the week, it was as if he had never existed there at all. The criminal charges came next. The United States Attorney's Office moved fast. 2 counts of assault, 1 count of evidence tampering, 1 count of federal civil rights violation. Dawson's attorney advised him to fight it. He couldn't afford to. The evidence was a mountain, and he was standing at the bottom with a plastic shovel. He pleaded no contest. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised probation. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. Craig Dawson would never carry a badge again, anywhere, ever. Sergeant Vince Teller, the man who claimed he approved the procedure, but whose own body cam showed he arrived after it was over, was demoted and placed on indefinite administrative leave. A separate investigation was opened into his supervision record. He resigned before it concluded. The Granson County Police Department entered into a federal consent decree, a binding agreement requiring independent oversight of all booking procedures, mandatory retraining, and the complete review of every internal complaint dismissed as unfounded in the past decade. The lead federal attorney assigned to oversee compliance was Brielle Hammond. Deputy Corinne Sadler transferred to a department in a neighboring county. She joined a statewide task force on booking room accountability, one of the first of its kind. In an interview, she said one sentence that mattered more than all the rest. She gave me permission to stop being afraid. The 3 women whose complaints had been buried received formal apologies from the department and financial settlements. 2 of them now volunteer with a legal advocacy nonprofit that Brielle helped establish. The 3rd went back to school. She's studying criminal justice. And Brielle Hammond, 6 months later, was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on law enforcement reform. She walked into that hearing room in Washington, D.C. with her hair grown back, full, natural, a crown of dark coils framing her face. She sat behind the microphone, adjusted it once, and began her testimony with 6 words. My name is Brielle Hammond. The room listened.
Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. If you were Deputy Sadler, standing in that room, watching it happen, would you have spoken up? Or would fear have kept you quiet? Tell me in the comments. I want your real answer, not the one that sounds good, the real one. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because next week, we're telling the story of a janitor who walked into a boardroom and shut down a $1 billion fraud. You don't want to miss that one.